Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, another interview live in the studio, which is fantastic. My guest today is Richard Jeffs from Yellow Dot Forum, and we are talking about stakeholder capitalism. Now, I have to say that is something that is relatively new. I've heard the term several times, but I don't fully understand what it means. And I dare say the lovely audience out there are in the same position. Hello, Richard, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard, for inviting me on today.
No, it's a pleasure. So, this is quite a serious subject. I will try not to be too whimsical, as I often do in my interviews, mainly because this is such a serious subject and it's quite dark where we're likely to go if we don't push back against this. But, fortunately, you do come with solutions.
Yes.
Great. Well, that's a relief, isn't it? But let's find out then. What is stakeholder capitalism?
Okay, stakeholder capitalism is the political system that was enacted in 2020, and we reached full stakeholder capitalism by 2030. And stakeholder capitalism is the root cause of all the strange events that we've seen since 2020 and will continue to see over the next 5 years. It's a political system that essentially replaces the two political systems that are in use around the world, and they are shareholder capitalism that we have here in the West and state capitalism that's used in places like China. So state capitalism is also known as communism, and shareholder capitalism, the system that we had before 2020, is also known as free market capitalism.
And is it true that if you take the extremes of both of those, you end up effectively in the same place with a sort of fascist type society?
Well, free market capitalism is designed to be a free society, a free economy.
Right.
So there isn't an extreme or an authoritarian element to free market capitalism. The idea is that the shareholders under shareholder capitalism has the freedom to trade with whoever we want to. The shareholders are the company owners. So that's a that's a free system. Of course, there are problems, as I'm sure you know, and a lot of your listeners will know, that there are problems with free market capitalism. In particular, companies are incentivized to put profit before people, as what you'll see with pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
So, but if you look at communism, then it's an extreme system. It's an authoritarian system that shifts authority to the state or the government in China. So that's an extreme system. So what we're seeing in the West is a move away from free market capitalism, and when you move away from a free economy, a free society, all you can do is increase authority.
Right.
So we're moving away from free market capitalism to a system called stakeholder capitalism. So the two existing ones are shareholder capitalism and state capitalism, and now we have stakeholder capitalism, and that's an authoritarian political system that shifts authority not to the state like communism, but to a group of stakeholders.
Right. So, I mean, is that what we're talking about? One world government?
Yes.
Yeah. Just going back to the free capital, the freeholder capitalism,
Free market capitalism.
Free market capitalism. We're seeing, it seems at the moment, a huge corporate takeover where companies are buying up everything that's small, either streamlining it, getting rid of titles, and then having effectively a series of, I suppose, I'm going to call them bland products, so that in certain industries, the smaller guy, a lot of his lines, which might be unique and interesting to a smaller niche, have been dropped in favour of the more popular brands that they may have run. And in the end, you're seeing these extremely large companies, the likes of Amazon and eBay and all of these big, and many of them online. Is that the the sort of extreme of the free market capitalism then? Or is that beginning to go into stakeholder capitalism?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because free market capitalism is essentially a game, a race to become the most successful company. It's a very competitive model. So you have companies that would compete against one another to become these big monopolies like Amazon or eBay,
right,
and so forth. And so what you're and that was accelerated from the third industrial revolution, okay, which was the invention of the internet, where companies can then have a global marketplace and sell their products globally, and then they become more competitive, like Amazon have done, where they've lowered their overheads by using machinery and technology. So they become extremely competitive, and then they can reduce their margins and their profits, so they can offer products and services cheaper. So that's how they acquire this monopoly, and then we're just moving into this new industrial revolution called the fourth industrial revolution, which is something we can maybe talk about later on, but that is the invention of artificial intelligence,
right,
and that describes how artificial intelligence will disrupt the way we work again, and like what happened in the third industrial revolution, where Blockbuster Video went bankrupt, and Netflix grew.
The whole streaming thing, rather than the renting of solid, real physical objects, the sort of digitalization of everything.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And then artificial intelligence is going to disrupt the workplace again by having machines take our jobs. And that's a very different scenario than the third and the second and the first industrial revolutions. But essentially what's happened is that these organizations that are forming these monopolies, the heads or the executives, have all become members of the World Economic Forum, and they call themselves stakeholders. And it's not just companies; it's also the heads of NGOs and governments. So the World Economic Forum, most of your viewers, I'm sure, will know who the WEF are.
They'll know who they are.
And its founder Klaus Schwab. An interesting fact, though. The World Economic Forum was founded 50 years ago for the purpose of transitioning the world to stakeholder capitalism.
Right.
That's explained by Klaus Schwab himself.
So it's a 50-year plan.
It's a 50-year plan that's failed several times.
Oh, good.
And
so that means that we have optimism that it could still fail, even though they may be a little bit more advanced now.
That's correct. However, it's a very sophisticated plan, and they are harnessing the fourth industrial revolution. So it's a time in the future when AI takes our jobs. They're accelerating that, or they're bringing it forward. So in 2020, the World Economic Forum released a document called the Future of Jobs Report. And in that, they explained that the lockdowns has accelerated our transition to the fourth industrial revolution already by 2020 by 5 years. And there are several other mechanisms that they put in place that will further accelerate it, so will bring it forward. And then they plan to harness this fourth industrial revolution, where our jobs are disrupted, we lose a lot of our jobs, and then we become dependent on the state. It's more so than the state; it actually becomes dependent on them for our basic living needs, our house, our food, and when that happens, when we're dependent on the state, that's when they have the ability to inflict tyranny that's far more extreme than any previous, totalitarian regime. So that's a scary prospect, something we can maybe come on to and talk about how we protect ourselves from that, but how we can also, stop this from happening. Well, it's going to be difficult to stop entirely, but to mitigate that problem and provide more security for everyone, we can come on to that.
And presumably these people who are running it, the sort of the prime ministers, the MPs, the CEOs of companies and those sort of people, they're in on this. They are the stakeholders, and that you and I as everyday people, we're not the stakeholders. Can we become stakeholders? Can we be part of it?
We can't. It's a select we can if we were to create a company that becomes a monopoly,
Right.
and essentially Klaus Schwab has run this program called Young Global Leaders for a very long time now, and he indoctrinates his young global leaders who are aspiring politicians and executives in these companies and the heads of these NGOs such as the EU, UN, etc. These are all the stakeholders in this new system. And he's been indoctrinating them with his inclusive and sustainable ideas. Now, they are the two policies of stakeholder capitalism, and we'll come on to that. But essentially, these two policies are designed to get us to want stakeholder capitalism. So think of this. So what I want to encourage people to do is step back away from thinking that there is this dark force and they're taking our freedoms away, and start to look at it in comparison to how China transitioned away from free market capitalism to communism, and they did so by Chairman Mao indoctrinated the working class to believe they were oppressed by the capitalists or by free market capitalism.
Right.
So he indoctrinated them with these inclusive ideas to become angry with anyone who owns a business, anyone who owns land, for example, and encouraged them to join the Red Guards, which is a social justice movement, and then further encouraged them to go out and overturn capitalism in favor of communism.
Is this what happened in Russia with Stalin and all of that, where they went after the farmers and effectively took away their land?
So Marxism is a idea, or cultural Marxism, that's been used by tyrants to shift nations to communism for a long time. And the idea is to make people angry with the current system, the current political system, and go out and join the social justice movements and force that transition from the bottom up. So it appears, like in China during the Cultural Revolution, that the shift was driven from the people, by the people, but it was all manipulated by the tyrants at the top.
So is that why? Okay, so is that why we have this Labour government who is acting with such strange policies, and causing not only their own voters, but of course anybody else who voted, and saying this is so extreme? They are actually snarling at us by taking away all the rights and taking away like these local elections that they want to do, and the fuel winter payments and things. And so that we start to think this system does not work anymore.
Correct, yeah. And it's not just Labour, it was the Conservatives too. Rishi Sunak was also is a World Economic Forum stakeholder, as is Starmer. So in the elections, doesn't matter who you're voting for. The idea for the stakeholders who, after being indoctrinated by Klaus Schwab with his inclusive and sustainable ideas, they are placed into positions of power. And most of our government leaders, if you go out through history, they've all been World Economic Forum members and placed into those positions to almost like portray this illusion of a democracy where, but there's the two heads of the same coin. You've got two different parties, both driving the same agenda, and as I say, it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're going to get stakeholder capitalism. But yeah, ultimately Starmer is a very prominent World Economic Forum member who is driving Klaus Schwab's policies to transition us to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030.
Why would people, if they could see us going in that direction, and I'm talking about, say, the army, the police, and the sort of lower level people in authority who actually have to interact with you and I, why would they also go along with it?
Because they don't understand that we're transitioning to an authoritarian political system. So the only way a handful of tyrants can manipulate billions of people in China to want communism is to indoctrinate the Chinese to want it. Otherwise they would rise up and overturn the government.
Right.
So one of the, as I mentioned, the inclusive ideas and we'll come on to the sustainable after, and that's the most serious part of this policy, or the most serious policy that's heavily entrenched with regards to the indoctrination throughout the world, throughout the public. I'll come back onto that because that's a very interesting one. But I want to start with inclusive. Inclusive at the moment, instead of targeting the working class, which is what happened during the Cultural Revolution, which is what Mao did to get China to want communism, the stakeholders are targeting black and trans people to make them believe that they're oppressed by free market capitalism. It's the same playbook, but a slightly different target audience. And the idea is that black people are oppressed by free market capitalism, and those ideas that are being propagated is called critical race theory.
Oh yes, we've heard about critical race theory.
So that idea is to get people to think that black people are oppressed, and that we need a new political system in order to make them more inclusive.
Right.
That's where the inclusive word comes from.
Yes.
And the same with trans people. They are indoctrinating trans people to believe that they're born in the wrong body, and that they should be allowed to take part in female-only sports and use female spaces. And anyone like J.K. Rowling who says they shouldn't, well, that's evidence of they're oppressed. That's the oppressor. So the media and all the stakeholders, and again, the most Fortune 500 companies, the heads of those most Fortune 500 companies are the heads of media as well. So the head of the BBC in the UK, the head of Ofcom, Melanie Dawes and Tim Davie at the BBC, are both World Economic Forum stakeholders. They are propagating these inclusive ideas to encourage trans people to take part in female sports and use female-only spaces, and believe that trans and black people are oppressed. And the way that, and the solution to it is stakeholder capitalism. So it's to say free market capitalism is making you oppressed. We need stakeholder capitalism to make you more inclusive. And the policies in particular that they're rolling out that makes black and trans people allegedly more inclusive, less oppressed, and more inclusive, is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh yes.
So
we hear those tropes being thrown out at us.
So that idea in the economy is to encourage companies to adopt these DEI policies, and what that does, it essentially gives it encourages companies to hire more people who are allegedly oppressed.
Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, so this, we hear stories then of pilots who have been hired, who are of one of these minorities, not on merit, but on the fact that they tick one of these boxes, and then the aeroplane, let's say, gets into trouble, threatening the lives of people, not because they're any good, or that it's a normal human error from somebody who's experienced or could get out of trouble, but they're in trouble because that person's been hired absolutely for the wrong reason.
Correct, yeah. In order to give more jobs to people who are allegedly oppressed, you have to discriminate against people that are the oppressor. So if you're a white man today, you're considered an oppressor.
Are you oppressing me at this precise moment?
Well, you're a white man, so
yes.
we are oppressing.
We counter each other.
So yeah,
right.
So there's a lot of oppression going on in this room, but it's against each other.
Yeah, we're pushing back our oppression not to you, the lovely audience, of course, but those who are oppressing all of us.
Yeah. So essentially, what they're doing is discriminating against white men in order to give the illusion of stakeholder capitalism being more inclusive of people who are allegedly oppressed.
Okay, and that's the inclusion.
That's the inclusion part of these policies, yeah.
And the sustainability part.
And I just want to add a little bit more to that is that's not just the alleged oppressed that are indoctrinated. These are most young people now in education. The gender identity ideas, that's very similar to critical race theory. It's about propagating the idea that there are lots of genders and you can be born in the wrong body. It's where all the pronouns and so forth come from.
But aren't people seeing through this now?
People are with that, yeah. Diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of people are still. A lot of people there are a lot of people who are heavily oppressed, and they're called woke. You would have heard of it.
Oh yes.
So
use
woke,
the term myself, but not in a positive way.
So woke is essentially just means that you've been indoctrinated with stakeholder capitalism's inclusive and sustainable ideas.
And if you were to present that to them, can they see how they might have been indoctrinated? If you were to sit them down and say, look, do you think these things really add up? And would they go, no, I firmly believe that? Or do you think that they could go, oh yeah, I've been indoctrinated?
Well, indoctrination isn't something that's easy to remove. Doctrines are not easy to remove quickly.
No.
It could take months, it could take years.
Yes.
And but ultimately what we now have, and I'm a former TV producer who has independently made a lot of content and documentaries that proves that we're being transitioned undemocratically and discreetly to a global authoritarian political system called stakeholder capitalism. That's irrefutable in the film. So showing people evidence of this and then explaining it in that context, rather than having the arguments that trans people are not women and so forth, all these arguments that people have. It's almost like the semantics that they're arguing. Step back and say, oh no, what's happening
is
the
bigger picture.
Yeah, we're transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, and what they're doing is making you believe that you're oppressed by free market capitalism, so that you accept these new diversity, equity, inclusion ideas. So it's an easier conversation to have. It's an easier way to describe it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end with regards to the propaganda in the solution, how we can solve this problem. But
right,
yeah. So that's DEI.
So just to put you on the spot, then, my son. My eldest son, who's 33, 34, something like that, everything I talk about, if I'm talking, he'll see it as conspiratorial or theory, and he wants nothing to do with it. So now if I wanted to sort of say, look, Stan, this is going on, and I can prove it to you if you will leave your... leave your
come with an open mind.
Yeah, come with an open mind and have a look at it. What's the best way of trying to get people just to open their mind to accept that reality might not be quite what they seem?
Yeah. Okay. So it's an interesting question. So what I've been doing, there's different levels of indoctrination with a lot of people. I've got a cousin that as soon as I call her, if she picked up by accident the other day, and I said, I would like to tell you about my new film, hang up on me straight away. And there are people that just will shut down straight away. They don't want to hear it because they've been indoctrinated over the last 4 years to believe that anyone who is questioning the government is a dangerous right-wing conspiracy theory. I mean, so it's immediately embedded within their in the subconscious part of their brain that you trust the government and everyone else is dangerous and they're right wing, so that's a difficult one. So what I do in that instance is I show them stakeholder capitalism on the BBC website or in the Financial Times or so, because it's
so within the sphere that they would deem safe and
exactly
honest.
Yeah. Have you heard of stakeholder capitalism? Okay. No, I haven't. Okay. Here it is on the BBC website. Here it is in the Financial Times. Here it is. So in the corporate sector, I used to work in television. I now work as a tech entrepreneur. And in the corporate sector, most people have heard of stakeholder capitalism. Okay, so it's not a conspiracy theory.
Right.
And that's why I encourage people to start talking about stakeholder capitalism, because you do not sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Right.
So the first thing is to get people to understand that stakeholder capitalism is a real thing if they are unaware of it already. And the next thing then is to say, you might have heard of its two policies. One is called inclusive, one is called actually I skip that and I go straight to their solution, which is one's called diversity, equity, inclusion, the other one's called net zero. You've heard of them. So we'll come on to the sustainable part in a minute, but ultimately then it's getting people then just to ease them in. They can see this is a real thing. And the film that I have, the 40-minute film, there's no mention of the pandemic, there's no mention of the vaccines. I purposefully left them out in the first episode to ensure that this is just about stakeholder capitalism, so that everyone can comfortably watch it.
Yeah, because I suppose those two things that you mentioned there are things that will just flare up a warning, this is not safe for us to watch.
Correct, yeah. But I've got people who invested in my tech startup quite a few years ago called angel investors, and I obviously want to wake them up because I'm concerned about people being indoctrinated who have shares in my business.
Yeah.
So they've almost been a bit of a testing ground. I'll share this with them again, and I do it regularly. Because I have proven irrefutably, and they know this in the film, that we're being transitioned undemocratically and discreetly to a global authoritarian political system. As I say, I repeat that because that's all part of removing the doctrines from people. So once people see that, and again, that's proven irrefutably because all the way through the film, all I've done is take information from reports on the World Economic Forum that's produced by the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab and other stakeholders talking about it. So Klaus Schwab openly talks about stakeholder capitalism, and the reason why he's talking about it and the stakeholders are talking about it is because he wants us to get on board with it. He wants us to want it. That's the best way to get us to
But surely anything that Klaus Schwab says is actually tarnishing it with the thing that we don't want.
Well, it shows, it's irrefutable because it's them who's talking about it.
Right.
So it's irrefutable that we're transitioning to stakeholder capitalism. But the indoctrination is so entrenched that the next thing they do, well, okay, they know it's happening. Well, surely this can't be a bad thing, so it must be a good thing. So they read up at it and go, oh, okay, inclusive ideas. Oh, okay, it makes people less oppressed. It makes people, that makes companies and the world more inclusive. Oh, okay, and it's more sustainable. It saves us from this threat of climate change. So we can come on to the next part of that conversation after. But you can already see that what we've done is get people to actually realise we're transitioning to another political system. So the first thing I do then is say, are you happy that we're being transitioned undemocratically and discreetly to another political system away from free market capitalism? Surely that isn't right.
Yeah.
Surely you
should be asked.
Surely we should be asked, or at least informed that this is happening, and that gets people in a place where they can't really comment. It's like, that is wrong. And then the next thing is to then talk to them about sorry, I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, so I'll come back onto that in a second.
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, the worrying thing is that you say, well, let me put it this way. In my world, of course, I've become very awake to a number of things. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard then to put your mind back into your ordinary everyday person, because I'm sitting here listening to you and you're saying people don't see that we're transitioning, or that globalists are pushing agendas that we don't want. And it seems very strange to me that there are people out there who go, well, anything that Klaus Schwab says, would be an anathema to them, that they wouldn't want, if he says we're going to go over here, that the rest of the public will go, well, we don't want to go over here. He looks like a Bond villain. He sounds like a Bond villain. Everything he says sounds rather mean and nasty, and we don't want part of it. So we're all going to go over here. And yet you're saying that people actually will listen to these guys and say, yeah, no, that all sounds good.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the majority of people.
That's hard to swallow, because I suppose my audience and I, which is a tiny percentage of the population, somehow are able to use critical thinking and common sense to reason that doesn't sound very good. So people have been brainwashed
Exactly.
so much. What is the worst that's going to happen if we don't do something about this?
By 2030, we will experience the worst totalitarian regime in human history.
But what does that mean? What does it look like?
Okay. Do you mind if I come on to that after the sustainable part?
Oh, yeah,
so please
carry
do
on.
ask, because that's a really great
Right,
question.
okay.
What does the world look like by 2030?
Well, because if we all know what we've got in store for us, we may be more incentivized to do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just to give you an idea that I moved away from beginning to grow my tech company to make this film because it's the most important thing I can do, and it's taken me 2 years in the making, and that's because it has to be perfect. It had to irrefutably explain what's happening. So it is more serious than most people think. This isn't a case of pushing back. This isn't a case of just rejecting a lot of these policies. It's not COVID 2.0. They've got some very serious things in the pipeline for us, and we have a small window of opportunity, which I'll come on to. But yeah, I'd love to talk about sustainability as well, because that's something that is the most scariest part of this for me. So sustainability is a policy. It's a stakeholder capitalism policy where inclusive ideas were a playbook that's been used by tyrants for generations. Sustainability is a relatively new idea that was created by Klaus Schwab, possibly by Henry Kissinger, who was his mentor at that time, when the Cultural Revolution was happening in the late 60s, and then they founded the World Economic Forum to shift us to stakeholder capitalism. So they integrated the inclusive ideas, or the playbook, to get us to want this new political system. But the sustainable ideas, and may I add, over the last 50 years, they've been trying to roll out stakeholder capitalism several times. There's been several attempts at pandemics that failed. There've been several attempts, or the Marxist indoctrination has been, entrenched within our education systems for many years. First of all, the targeted feminism. That's where that's come from. So you can see that they're looking at lots of different demographics and trying to convince us that specific demographics are oppressed. And today you will see that you've got this idea of what was it? It was called Mao. Toxic masculinity. To almost convince women that men are bad. To drive that separation between men and women. And you see divorce rates are considerably higher in comparison to 20 or 30 years ago. So you can see how the indoctrination has played out through many generations there. But coming on to the sustainable ideas then, so that's based on the idea that climate change poses an existential threat, and pretty much everything we do, such as this studio setup, anything that uses electricity, is killing the planet, and that's caused by the burning of fossil fuels. As most of our electrical grid is all based on fossil fuels, most things that we do is killing the planet, and of course that's the main perpetrator is shareholder capitalism. It's free market capitalism that's causing climate change to happen, and climate change poses an existential threat. So we're all going to perish unless we give up our use of any energy that's powered by fossil fuels.
So does that mean that the whole business about the taking of the agricultural land and smothering it in wind turbines and solar panels is purely there to show greed and the free market capitalism not working, because people are very upset and angry that their countryside is disappearing, especially as there is no sun anymore because they've got rid of that, and you've got this pointless stuff, and we are also being encouraged to do everything electric. You know, get rid of your log burning fire, get rid of your gas, get rid of everything, have EV cars. So we're all supposed to get this electricity, which is causing more greenhouse problems, if one believed all that nonsense. And is all of that just orchestrated to get us to a point where we go, this government system is wrong, you're destroying the planet actually in your net zero policies?
Yeah, so the idea again, it's always about control. So shifting us away from this free market, this free society, to this authoritarian one, and it's by inducing a state of fear among the public that climate change poses an existential threat, and unless we replace or change everything about our lives, then we're all going to perish. And their answer, of course, their solution is stakeholder capitalism, and it's Klaus Schwab's net zero policy. So if you ever wondered where the term net zero come from, it's come directly from Klaus Schwab, and it's been disseminated by his stakeholders, who, as I explained, are the heads of most Fortune 500 companies, most NGOs such as the UN, the WHO, and all G20 governments, which some would argue that, and I would argue that the US is not one of those governments anymore. Now Trump's getting in, but ultimately G20 governments include Xi Jinping and Putin as well. So we shift away, and I'm digressing slightly, but we shift away from free market capitalism to these regional political systems that we have in each country, to this global political system where the stakeholders, who are the heads of all the organizations I just mentioned and G20 countries, all have control. So they formed a new global government under this new system. So yeah, it's a plan really. The climate change is the big thing now. As you mentioned, diversity, equity, inclusion, the inclusive ideas are all, people are seeing through them now. They're rejecting them, as a lot of people are. Of course, there's still a lot of people who are indoctrinated by them, but a lot of people are rejecting them. But it's the net zero plan, which is the solution that Klaus Schwab is proposing to this existential threat of climate change.
So even despite the fact that Greta and her team of,
who is a World Economic Forum stakeholder, she's a member of the World Economic Forum.
The doom goblin herself has put this doom on us for quite some time, and before that, others were claiming, "Oh, the world's going to end. We're going to see floods, pictures of London underwater," and none of this has actually happened. Surely at some point people are going, hang on a second, this is just complete rubbish. Yes, we can see now they're manipulating the weather to, and if it's man-made global warming, it's due to these idiots up there with their harps and goodness knows what. But it's not the natural phenomenon. Of course the planet is warming. It heats up and it cools down. History tells us that. But this nonsense that it's our fault has clearly got to be dispelled.
Yeah, again, that is one of the policies or one of the ideas that are heavily indoctrinated. Everyone believes, or a lot of people believe, that climate change is killing the planet.
But it isn't, is it?
It's not. No. There's a lot of data to show that. But what I try not to do is go into the data when I'm talking to people. And in the first episode, I simply say, top level, they want to move us away from free market capitalism, and they're using inclusive ideas and sustainable ideas to shift us to this new political system. And the solution is stakeholder capitalisms, diversity, equity, inclusion, and net zero. So what I tend to do with people and say, okay, if you believe that climate change poses an existential threat, what's the solution? I push it back on them, ask them a question. And they will say, "Oh, I don't really know." So, do you want to know what the solution that our government solution to this is? And it's not just our government; it's all government solution. It's net zero. Do you know what net zero means? Net zero means zero fossil fuels. So everything that you do with work or at home, your heating, your electricity, your car, it's all powered by fossil fuels. how do you feel that you will never be able to go on holiday again? Do you enjoy flying a couple of times a year away on holiday? That's not going to be allowed, okay? Because the net zero plan means zero emissions, zero fossil fuels. And so ask them the question. And when they get thinking about, okay, yeah, so whenever the solution to a crisis is the removal of our freedom, then you have to question whether the crisis is actually real.
Yes.
That's just sensible, right?
Yes.
That's
just being absolutely.
That's just being smart. So this is what I'm asking you to do, is just question, are you happy with that? And at the same time, they're transitioning us away from this free market capitalism, from this free economy, to this global authoritarian political system called stakeholder capitalism. Huge coincidence, right? So it's about asking questions and getting to think about that rather than trying to convince them with the data. The data doesn't work because no fact will
doesn't motivate people, for one thing.
Yeah, but at the same time is that with indoctrination is more powerful than facts. You could I was going to use an analogy there about religion, but maybe I don't go into that. But ultimately, you can see how often you present facts, and we've all presented facts during COVID era. But it's not as powerful as the ideas that are indoctrinated. These are beliefs. These are beliefs that take months of repetitive information, affirmations that are disseminated to get people to think a specific way, and that's how you get an entire. It's the world's biggest cult. It's how you get an entire population to want an authoritarian political system that violates their human rights, and that's how powerful it is. So net zero, going back to net zero, is that the zero part is no fossil fuels. The net part is, well, actually you can burn fossil fuels. You can fly, because you see all the stakeholders flying into Davos every year in their private planes.
Yes.
Now, the idea behind the net part is it's called offsetting.
Oh, yes.
Offsetting your carbon emissions. Now, you can carry on flying if you pay a carbon tax. And what that does is that they take that money and they apparently go and plant some trees on the other side of the world. Okay, and those trees will supposedly, or should, soak up the carbon that you're creating. So you can emit carbon as long as you pay to soak it back up. And that will allow the rich to be able to continue to travel and live more freely, where the poor, and this is a throwback to the fourth industrial revolution, who most of us will lose our jobs to AI in the future, will be restricted to staying within our towns. Now, Klaus Schwab's got
15-minute cities,
yes,
etc.
Klaus Schwab's got a plan for that, of course.
Yes,
15-minute cities. Which is everything you need within a 15-minute walk.
Yeah.
So you don't need to go anywhere.
So you don't need to go anywhere and broaden your horizons and see different cultures and experience different foods, and we've seen that in England and in Great Britain. The uglification, everything looks the same. The brands on every high street, dialects change, and now sort of everybody speaks with the same dialect. We've seen this. It's
a mixed culture. So don't forget, in the fourth industrial revolution, when we become dependent on the stakeholders, they're going to provide everyone with this universal basic income to survive. Now, it's going to be the same amount of money in most places, and it's just going to be a one world. They're removing cultures essentially, so we're all mixed, we're all merged into one community.
So, I'm just looking at the clock, and we've already been going for 45 minutes, and I do want to get onto solutions so that people do stay with us and come away with some positive aspect or things that they can do. So here we are, transitioning, as you so rightly say, and many.
You're not going trans, are you? Just to be sure.
Just to be sure,
yeah.
Transitioning it as in growing parents.
Okay.
Not yet, not at the moment.
Okay.
But you never know.
I thought was going to be, just declaring an exclusive.
Well, I'm now going to run a little bit of video with I was dressed up in my fishnet tights and my basque, reading stories of a sexual nature to children, which is the best thing that you can possibly do these days if you want to survive in this world, apparently. Which is rather frightening. So, I mean, obviously, getting kids out of schools are things that people are beginning to do because they're realizing that school is actually just indoctrinating kids from an early age. The old, give me the boy until 7 and I'll give you the man, all that sort of stuff. So what do we do? How do we get out of this, Richard?
Okay, so if the problem is that we're transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, if that's the cause of everything that we see happening, and it isn't just the inclusive and sustainable ideas, they've got lots of different mechanisms to disrupt and destabilize our nations to get us from point A to point B over a 10-year period. That plan, by the way, is called the Great Reset. That's also the name of the 10-year transition, just like China has transitioned to communism was called the Cultural Revolution. So this is a very sophisticated plan. The problem is everything's being caused by our transition to stakeholder capitalism. Therefore, we have to stop our transition to stakeholder capitalism.
Yes.
So that's so when I was making these films, I was asking that question: how do we stop this? One of the things that I've done is set up yellow.forum. So it's the color yellow.forum. And this is a platform that essentially provides us the tools that we need to come together and become organised and join initiatives. There's several initiatives on here. A lot of the stuff you're seeing there is a lot of the content, but you can see there a lot of the initiatives. And if you go down to agendas, you can find out a little bit more. And soon I'll have all the different agendas on there. It's taken a while to create them, but essentially. It's a way for us to come together, join initiatives and push back. So I believe that working together will enable us to have a much bigger impact than working, in our own little silos.
Yes.
So,
and I mean, but just to jump in on there, trying to get people to get together and unite is, and it has been, we've seen these little freedom hubs and or the lawful versus legal hubs, and everybody's going, oh no, but our way's best and your way's not. And of course, we've all been shoved in these silos. And so trying to get everybody to join together, there's a lot of egos out there which are sort of preventing that.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one thing I found. I thought when I, showing all this data and this information, I thought everyone was going to go, oh, well done, mate. Give me a pat on the back and let's see if we can partner and
then they'll
solve
say,
this.
I've got a better idea.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I'm not the person to lead this. But we do need to start working together.
Yes.
And unfortunately, people, the leaders in this freedom space, a lot of people are just ignoring the fact that stakeholder capitalism is a thing. They're not talking about it. I've had a lot of people in our networks that have gone to them when they're just ignoring it for some reason. It's because it's a different narrative than what they convey. I don't know what the problem is, but ultimately we who do have the platforms, people like yourself who do have the audience, we've all got to find a way of actually working together with a common plan to stop our transition. And the first thing we need to do is just create more awareness, just like what you're doing today by inviting me onto the show, we need to just inform more people of what's happening, because ultimately it's this transition is predominantly happening in the economy by the companies. They're accepting the diversity, equity, inclusion policies, they're accepting the net zero policies, which is all being forced upon using this credit score called ESG, which stands for environmental social governance. And we need to help people understand that what you're wanting, because in the corporate sector, a lot of people want these diversity, equity, inclusion policies. They want these net zero policies. They want ESG. We need to show them that actually what you're asking for belongs to this new political system called stakeholder capitalism. And here's a film. Here's a different narrative. Here's what that is. So if we were to reject that, then we reject stakeholder capitalism. So I think that that's the first thing we need to do, is all start talking about stakeholder capitalism as the root cause of all of this. So that already we're in a position where Because don't forget, it's all about propaganda. They want us. They want us to want stakeholder capitalism. But as soon as we show that stakeholder capitalism is a global authoritarian political system, and our transition is happening undemocratically and discreetly, then ultimately people will start to push back on it. Push back on these policies, because that's the main thing. You can believe that climate change is a real thing and it poses a real threat, but we can show them the solution is not the removal of our freedom.
Right.
And that's the main message that we want to convey. So what I'm doing next is I'm looking for sponsorship to create a talk show. So essentially the forum is partnered with a media organization that essentially is designed. So what we want to do is to report global events with their relationship to, how they relate to our transition to stakeholder capitalism. So like we mentioned earlier on, so instead of talking about whether trans people are real women or should be used to use the female spaces, we want to be able to show events that are happening and how that affects the transition to stakeholder capitalism. So it's reporting news, it's talk shows and debate shows where we can talk about things on a very awake, very high level.
Right.
And then together, we can all create a solution. What can we do this week, all of us? If we all come together, what can we do? Could we all email Piers Morgan? Can we all text him and say, you must check out stakeholder capitalism? Wake someone like that up. That would be very powerful. The same in the US. And I mean, these are just some ideas off the top of my head. But if we all came together and thought about this, as I said, I'm not the person to lead this, and it needs to be a collective, a collection of us all working together in a partnership. But ultimately, yes, we can stop our transition to stakeholder capitalism, but we have a small window of opportunity before a financial crash, and they accelerate our transition to the fourth industrial revolution, where a lot of us lose our jobs and become dependent on them. And when we're dependent on them, we're very susceptible, we're very weak, and we're very vulnerable to tyranny.
I want to ask you two related questions, which I think might come into this, and you've hinted that one is part of it. Firstly, the Arla milk thing. Is the Arla milk thing, do you think this Bovaria that's been announced that's going into the cows to stop them farting so we don't, destroy the planet thanks to those cows, really, because Arla have decided, we don't mind having a hit on fresh milk because we can sell oat milk and other artificial milks. And so we can actually then go to our partners and everybody else and say, we're now doing this milk, so we don't actually need cows anymore. And is that really part of the big thing to get rid of agriculture as we know it, so they can start to feed us with artificial foods that have actually no real nutrients or vitamin value to us?
Correct. Yeah. So in the fourth industrial revolution, where we become dependent on them with the universal basic income, they can't just give us our money because they'll run out of money. They eventually just give it away. So they do have this central bank digital currency, CBDC, that they want to be able to provide us the money in. It's a currency which they can program and force us then to ensure that we buy our food from them and rent our houses from them, so they don't lose money. So it's almost like a token. But if they've got to feed 8 billion, 9 billion people around the world, then that's expensive, right? So they don't want to feed us expensive cows. That's a lot of work, a lot of money. So Bill Gates heavily invested in artificial meat. That's going to be an easy way to feed us. But ultimately, it's anti-human, all of this anyway. So a lot of the agendas do point towards them wanting to reduce the population. You've heard about the depopulation agendas that they have. And Bill Gates speaks very openly about this in his TED talk, or one of the big talks that he did. So ultimately, it's a stepping stone to say that cows are a problem, and we can eliminate these burps, and that will help save the planet. But ultimately, that's not going to work. be sustainable long term, so we need to eradicate cows. But in the meantime, they're going to continue to feed us with this very dangerous food that's got a lot of chemicals and additives, and that's been genetically modified in some way or another.
So the second one, as we're sort of fast heading towards the end of the show, at the moment in America, they're all looking up in the sky and seeing what they're calling drones or various things, and some are going, oh, are they UFOs, as in alien UFOs, unidentified flying object? They have another 3-letter word for UFOs. I can't quite latch onto that. And downstairs, before we came up here, you said, oh, yes, that sort of also relates to this whole thing, which at the moment, anything freaky in the news doesn't surprise me that it all relates. If it's in the news, if it's in controlled media, then, and it's a big thing, you betcha it's being deliberately placed there. So what's the story with the UFOs, in your opinion?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's all about so all of the stakeholders are ambassadors for stakeholder capitalism. Their objective is to transition us from free market capitalism to stakeholder capitalism over a 10-year period, and that's not an easy thing to do. So they've got several crises. During my research into the World Economic Forum, they produced a lot of content about UFOs and aliens. So I assume, and everything the World Economic Forum produce has some form of relationship to our transition to stakeholder capitalism under the Great Reset Plan. So I suspect that an alien attack could be a way of inducing fear among the global population to get us to accept totalitarian conditions that we wouldn't otherwise accept.
So in other words, if there's an outside source, we need a global army to deal with that, whatever it is, and that needs to be orchestrated by a global government.
Correct.
And that's a sort of another big stepping stone to getting us to go, oh yeah, that sounds like a sensible thing, because our army is so tiny we couldn't do it on our own if they came over here.
Correct, yeah. It's induced that fear, lock us down. Okay, we can solve this problem, but it will require removing some of your freedoms. It's the standard technique, and it will require a global response with a global government. They've got all this together. Funny enough, they've already got all this ready to go to save us from this, existential threat from an alien invasion. So yeah,
the internet was clearly given to us to keep us occupied. Has it backfired on them that we are able to sit here and do this?
We shouldn't be right now, and that's because of our activism. That's because of how much progress we made in the early days by pushing back. But the censorship was high then, as you know. But ultimately, we are now in a position where a lot more people are awake, because it's a game for them. It's a fine line. They can only push the censorship hard enough to an extent where enough people are okay with it. When people start to go, hang on a minute, this is a bit suspicious, it's a bit authoritarian, then it gives their game away. So they have to do it incrementally. So we shouldn't be sitting here right now being able to do this. However, over the next couple of years, as things get really bad, as they really kind of tighten things up and accelerate this transition to stakeholder capitalism, one of the indications of this of the progress that we've made in this fight is that earlier the Future of Jobs report, where 50% of us will lose our jobs by 2025, which was a World Economic Forum report, has now been postponed to 42% will lose our jobs by 2027. So you can see we've postponed this transition to the fourth industrial revolution, but ultimately under full stakeholder capitalism, there is no room for independent media. Whether it's yourself with the network you have, or the Joe Rogans with millions of followers and listeners. So there's just not going to be room for independent media, and there's like Ofcom have already created the digital Act. I can't remember precisely what that's called, but ultimately that gives Ofcom and the head of Ofcom, Melanie Dawes, power to imprison people who report misinformation or disinformation. So and that's the maximum
Thanks
penalty
very much. That's
of
me
that.
then.
Yeah, that's the maximum penalty of that is life imprisonment. But you just need to see what's happening in China. My film explores that. It compares China with what's happening over there. And how they're a big force behind stakeholder capitalism. Klaus Schwab and Xi Jinping are very, very close friends. You just need to see how these ideas are very much based on the Chinese communist system, and over in China, people like yourself and myself who report government corruption. There's no future for us, which is why we have to win this.
So there we are. That's why they're building all these FEMA camps and these prisons left, right, and centre all over the place. I hope you'll come and visit. Regularly, if you're allowed on a bus. Probably won't be allowed there. You'll be shot at sight if you approach the place.
Can you bring me some bread with a file in it, if anyone?
Absolutely. A cake for me would be nice. I mean, if I'm going to be in one of these sodding places,
I
may as well have a nice tasty cake, even if it will kill me. Obviously, this isn't a laughing matter. This is a big, serious thing. Do go and check out yellow.forum, which is here, The Great Revolution, and check out the film. Is the film available at the moment?
You can see it there with the mouse at the moment. Stakeholder Capitalism, episode 1, 40 minutes, correct.
So, and how many films will there be?
So this is a 3-part episode to explain the full transition, as well as a film about the propaganda, but ultimately this is an ongoing series that will document our transition to stakeholder capitalism and potentially be an ongoing current affairs series.
Something for us to watch in that FEMA camp and go back with nostalgia. Remember when we were protesting against this or trying to stop it? Let's hope we do, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hope we do. We got to get active, and we mustn't remain complacent. Although I think we might see some weird stuff happening fairly soon anyway, which may help wake people up. Do you think that might help people wake people up? I mean, if they see aliens, are people really going to go along with that narrative?
The human mind is so disappointing that I've learned over the last few years. I think it's going to be difficult to get through to a lot of people, but we've seen something change in the US with the elections, with Trump.
And is Trump a good thing, do you think?
I believe so, although there is this idea of controlled opposition, which I don't think is healthy. And that's because we're all in the dark. We don't really know what's going on. We don't really know who's behind it. But ultimately, as soon as we start to tell this story that this is a transition to another political system, and it's a group of opportunists that are getting old, and it's their last attempt to transition us to, because stakeholder capitalism is Klaus Schwab's baby. That's his entire life's work, and he wants to see that happen before he passes away. So this is their last attempt. They've thrown all their chips in.
Are they rushing it?
They are not. It's well planned. They've got a great strategy, and they've got the most powerful people in the world working with them. So it's a very powerful force. And ultimately, Trump, if he's not controlled opposition, which I don't think he is, if there is such a thing as controlled opposition, I think it's Putin. But ultimately, anyone who is pushing the diversity, equity, inclusion, the climate change agenda, they will be the stakeholders. Anyone who's exposing it and pushing back against it, they will be people who are on our side, and they need support. They need our support. People like Russell Brand, for example, who is sticking his neck out because he's got sex charges against him now. It's a risk for him to do that. So he needs our support, and I just think that we need to be supporting anyone who is pushing back against this until they show sign of them actually shifting us to stakeholder capitalism to drive those ideas. It's all about propaganda. They need us all to get on board with this transition. So someone like Trump, who's saying climate change is a hoax, well, that's not going to help the stakeholders' agenda. So that gives me the assumption that they're on side, and I think that's a good thing. But they are small fish in the great scheme of things.
Yeah. Well, I'm a small fish in the great scheme of things, but if you do enjoy these programs, as you know, I'm demonetized left, right and centre now, and the algorithm doesn't push these videos out as much as it used to. But if you want it to continue, don't forget to support the channel, which would be great. And another way of supporting the channel is to go and check out the forum, because it's all our futures. Richard, thank you so much for coming in. putting the willies up us just before Christmas. It's very kind of you. But we are optimistic on this channel because I have the best viewers, as every channel will say. But my viewers do write to MPs. They get off their butt. They go out and protest. They go and make differences. So go and watch the film and join up. Do they join up something or be partners? Or I'm just looking at your thing.
I'm
keep in touch.
I'm making sure that all the content's available for free, because this is an extensive resource on everything you need to know about stakeholder capitalism. It's important that it's not behind any kind of sign-up wall or paywall.
And is there any fear that it would be taken down?
We've made sure that we own all of the infrastructure behind it. But ultimately, there is a subscription that you can join to take part, to help fund this, and a donate button. But yeah, if there's any sponsors for this, I'd like to create a media organisation. If you want to be part of if you want to promote your business or to invest in a really innovative new organisation, then please get in touch at info@yellow.forum.
Couldn't have done it better myself. Thank you so much, Richard. It's been a joy to talk to you. Do tune in again. I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests. Check out I'll put the link in the description so you know where to go. But on that note, from Richard and Richard, thank you for watching. Till next time, goodbye.
Thank you.